Honestly, Grace, this shed has to go. It's an eyesore. The words sliced through the air, sharper than the cheap plastic knife I was using to saw at a piece of fried chicken. My daughter-in-law, Jessica, didn't look up from her phone, her thumbs swiping rhythmically across the glowing screen. Her voice was flat, a statement of fact, not an opening for discussion. It was my 70th birthday. David and I are putting in a pickleball court, she continued, a faint, self-satisfied smile playing on her lips, as she probably liked to comment on one of her posts. All your little crafts, she said the word like it was something sticky she'd stepped in, her nose wrinkling in a pantomime of disgust, finally flicking her eyes toward the corner of the yard where my shed stood, my sanctuary. They can go in a storage unit, or the trash, it's all junk anyway. A single drop of grease slid off my chicken and landed on the paper plate, spreading into a dark, translucent circle. In front of me, on the gleaming quartz countertop, sat a cardboard bucket of KFC. My birthday dinner. For them, a courier had just delivered 2 large bags from a restaurant whose name I couldn't pronounce. A place with Michelin stars and a month-long waiting list. The air was thick with the competing smells of my lukewarm, greasy chicken and the delicate, herbaceous aroma of their seared scallops and truffle risotto. They were arranging their plates now, a ritual for the camera. Jessica held her phone aloft, finding the perfect angle. "How's this, babe?" she asked my son David. #family first, or should it be #birthday celebration? A little treat for us after a long week. I didn't exist behind her lens. I was just part of the background blur, an inconvenient piece of furniture. I watched the tiny red light on her phone, a malevolent eye staring, recording a life that did not include me. The bucket of chicken felt heavy in my lap. I hadn't eaten a piece yet. The hunger I'd felt an hour ago had vanished, replaced by a cold, hollow ache that started in my stomach and spread through my limbs. My son, David, finally chimed in, his eyes still glued to the chaotic symphony of explosions and gunfire on his massive, curved monitor, a Twitch stream. He was wearing headphones, but he'd heard enough. "Jess is right, Mum." His voice was muffled, distracted. He clicked his mouse furiously. "The smell from in here. It's probably toxic." He paused his game for a moment, swiveling in his ergonomic chair, but his gaze didn't meet mine. It drifted toward my hands, toward the plastic fork, the flimsy paper plate. A look of faint revulsion crossed his face, the same one Jessica had worn. "Whatever cheap paint you're using," he said, waving a hand dismissively in the direction of the back door toward my shed. "It's time to clean up. Seriously. We're putting the house on the market next quarter anyway. It's a seller's paradise in Dallas right now. Can't have that thing dragging down the property value." He turned back to his game, the headset sliding back over his ears, and the world of our shared living room was once again drowned out by the tinny sound of virtual warfare. The house on the market. My home. The home my late husband Richard and I had built, except it wasn't my home, not really. It was their asset. I was their liability. The smell. He thought it was cheap paint. The irony was a bitter pill on my tongue. The scent wasn't from paint. It was the scent of liberation, the aroma of justice, the quiet, earthy perfume of a secret I had nurtured for 20 years. It was the smell of my husband, Richard, or what was left of him. It was a smell they could never comprehend because to understand it, they would have to understand the man he was and the woman he had forced me to become. My fingers felt numb around the plastic fork. I set it down. The food was cold now. Jessica was tapping furiously on her phone, her face illuminated by its glow. She let out a little laugh. "Oh my God! Brenda just asked where we got the food." She is so jealous. I stood up. My joints creaked in protest. Neither of them noticed. I picked up the KFC bucket, the paper plate, the plastic cup of flat soda. I walked to the kitchen trash can, the one with the motion-activated lid that always seemed to snap shut before I was finished. I lifted the lid manually and dropped my birthday dinner inside, onto a bed of discarded artisan lettuce and the empty containers from their Michelin star meal. I didn't go to my room, the small guest space off the kitchen that always felt temporary. I slid open the glass door to the backyard. The evening air in Dallas was humid and thick, smelling of freshly cut grass from the lawn service that came every Tuesday. The sky was a deep, bruised purple, and the first stars were beginning to appear. Across the perfectly manicured lawn, past the landscaped flower beds and the saltwater pool that glowed an eerie blue, stood my shed. It was old, the wood weathered to a soft grey. From their perspective, from the clean, minimalist lines of their modern house, I could see why they called it an eyesore. It was organic, flawed, real. It leaned slightly to one side, a testament to a summer storm years ago. To them, it was a blight on their curated aesthetic. To me, it was the only place on this entire property where I could breathe. I walked across the damp grass, the cool blades tickling my ankles. The lock was a heavy, old-fashioned brass one. My fingers found the key on the chain around my neck, the metal cool against my skin. The lock clicked open with a familiar, satisfying thud. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, pulling the string for the single bare bulb that hung from the rafters. The light cast long, dancing shadows across the room. And then the smell washed over me. David was wrong. It wasn't toxic. It was elemental. It was the smell of dry earth, of mineral pigments, of canvas and turpentine, yes, but underneath it all was something else. A scent that was uniquely mine. It was the fine, gritty dust of fired clay, the sharp tang of binding agents, and the almost imperceptible, mineral-rich scent of bone. The dust motes danced in the single beam of light, swirling like tiny galaxies. Each one was a fragment of a story. Each one was a piece of him. My studio was crowded, every surface covered in my work. Canvases were stacked against the walls, some massive, some small enough to hold in the palm of my hand. They were all part of a single, sprawling collection I called Phoenix from the Ashes. The art world knew them. The art world paid millions for them, debating the identity of the reclusive genius known only as Anonymous. They praised the unique texture, the unparalleled depth of the crimson pigment I used, a colour no one had ever been able to replicate. I ran my hand over a large, unfinished canvas on an easel in the centre of the room. The surface was rough, almost like sandpaper. It was a swirling vortex of deep, angry reds and blacks, a colour that seemed to drink the light, the colour of a dying star, or a memory. I could almost feel him in the grit of the paint. The memory of his heavy hand on my shoulder, his voice, low and dismissive, telling me my art was a silly little hobby. The same words, echoed decades later by his son's wife. They wanted to build a pickleball court. They would bring in bulldozers and demolition crews. They would tear down these walls and pave over this sacred ground with smooth, soulless concrete. They would obliterate this universe I had built from the ashes of my old life. I looked around the shed, at the shelves lined with jars of powders and pigments. My gaze landed on a heavy ceramic urn tucked away in a shadowed corner behind a loose plank in the wall. It was plain, unassuming. No one would ever guess its contents. It was almost empty now. After 20 years, I had almost used it all. Richard was spread across dozens of canvases, scattered in private collections and museums around the world. A bit of his rage in a swirl of red on a painting in a London gallery. A piece of his cruelty in the jagged texture of a sculpture in a Tokyo penthouse. And soon, very soon, a sliver of him would be in my greatest masterpiece yet. I already had the name for it. Erasure. They thought the smell was cheap paint. They thought my work was junk. They thought I was a frail, useless old woman living on their charity. They had no idea about the fortune I commanded, the power I wielded from this dusty little shed. They had no idea that the toxic smell they complained about was the last lingering trace of the monster they called a father and a hero. It wasn't the smell of decay. It was the scent of my final, beautiful and complete liberation. And they were about to hand me the reason to finally unleash it. A pickleball court. It was so petty, so perfectly them. It would be their undoing. My name is Grace. I am 70 years old, a widow. That is the story everyone knows. The one written on the lines of my face and in the stoop of my shoulders. The official story is that I live on the charity of my son David and his wife Jessica. When my husband Richard passed away, the story goes that he left me with nothing but a mountain of debt and a closet full of his old suits. It's a simple, tragic narrative. The kind of story that makes neighbours nod with pity and acquaintances murmur, "Oh, that poor woman." They don't know the half of it. They don't know the truth of the real debt I was left with. Not a financial one, but a debt of years, of dreams, of the very colour of my own soul. Before Richard, my world was a canvas. I was a promising artist. My fingers were perpetually stained with cadmium yellow and cerulean blue. The smell of linseed oil was my perfume. I saw the world not in moments, but in compositions of light and shadow. I would look at a cluster of old men playing chess in the park and see a study in concentration and faded tweed. I would look at a rain-slicked street at dusk and see a symphony of reflected neon. My heart beat in rhythm with the swish of a brush on canvas. I was going to be someone. My professors said it, my friends knew it, and deep in my bones I believed it. Then I met Richard. He was charming, powerful, a whirlwind of ambition and expensive cologne. He saw my art, called it a delightful hobby, and I was so in love, so swept away by the life he promised, that I didn't hear the subtle condescension in his tone. He didn't want a partner. He wanted an accessory. A beautiful, well-mannered woman to host his dinner parties and admire his successes. An artist has a mind of her own, a world of her own. Richard couldn't tolerate a world that didn't revolve around him. The extinguishing of my spirit wasn't a sudden, violent act. It was a slow, methodical erosion. It started with little comments. "Darling, you have paint on your dress again. We have the Hendersons coming over." Then it became, "Why don't you put those things away for a while? This house is for living in, not for making a mess." The canvases I bought were left untouched. The easel gathered dust in a corner, before quietly disappearing one day during a spring cleaning. He replaced my passion with obligations. My time was filled with charity luncheons, board member dinners and meticulously planning vacations I had no interest in. He bought me jewellery to fill the emptiness on my wrists, designer clothes to cover the woman I used to be. And I let him. For David, my beautiful boy. I told myself that a stable home, a life of privilege, was a greater masterpiece than any painting I could ever create. I sacrificed my canvas for his future. I traded my colours for his security. When Richard died, the world he had built around me crumbled. The friends were his, the lifestyle was his, and, as the official story goes, the money was gone. Moving in with David and Jessica felt like the only choice, a natural conclusion to a life lived for my son. I arrived with 2 suitcases and a lifetime of unspoken grief, believing I would finally find my place, a quiet corner, in the family I had given everything to build. I was wrong. Their 10,000 square foot house, with its soaring ceilings and floors of polished marble, has more space than a cathedral, yet there is no room for me. I became a ghost in their guest room. My existence is a quiet shuffle down the hall, a carefully washed plate left to dry by the sink, a presence they tolerate but rarely acknowledge. I am a relic of a past they'd rather forget, a constant, silent reminder of their generosity. They speak around me, sometimes even through me, their voices echoing in the grand foyer as if I were just another piece of antique furniture. The guest room, with its pristine, unused furniture and impersonal hotel art, is not a bedroom. It is a storage unit for a person. This is the life they see. This is the grace they know, frail, dependent, and grateful for the crumbs they let fall from their table. A sad little story of a woman whose life ended when her husband's did. But that's only the official story. When the silence in the big house becomes too loud, when the weight of their disregard presses down on my chest, I retreat. I walk past the perfectly manicured lawn, past the 3-car garage that holds Jessica's pristine SUV and David's sports car, to the back of the property. There, half hidden by overgrown lilac bushes, stands a dilapidated shed. The paint is peeling, the wood is warped, and a fine layer of grime covers its single window. To them, it is an eyesore, a future pickleball court. To me, it is my entire universe. The moment I slide the heavy, groaning door shut, the world changes. The ghost in the guest room vanishes. The frail 70-year-old widow ceases to exist. Here in the dusty air, thick with the scent of earth and something else, something metallic and elemental, I become someone else. The world knows me by a different name. They call me Anonymous. To the galleries in London, the auction houses in New York, and the collectors in Dubai, I am the greatest mystery in the modern art world. Anonymous, an artist who appeared from nowhere, whose work commands tens of millions of dollars apiece, whose very identity is the subject of endless frantic speculation. My work hangs in minimalist mansions and the most prestigious museums. Critics write breathless essays about it. They praise the visceral, almost living texture of my paintings. They marvel at the deep, unsettling crimson and the swirling, textual ash-grey pigments that seem to absorb the light around them. They say it's like looking into the heart of a dying star, or the aftermath of a volcanic eruption. The collection is called Phoenix Rising from Dust. They have no idea how literal that title is. They have no idea that the power they feel, the raw, primal scream they see captured on canvas, is real. My art is not a hobby. It is a resurrection. It is the life that was stolen from me, reborn in a secret inferno. While David and Jessica discuss stock prices and luxury vacations in their sterile, white living room, I am here, in my sanctuary, orchestrating my revenge. They think my greatest asset is the social security check I sign over to them every month. They have no idea that a single canvas leaning against this rotting wall could buy and sell their entire street. They live in a house I own. They eat at a table I paid for. They condescend to a woman who holds their entire world in the palm of her hand. My art is my power. It is my secret life. It is the long, slow, patient alchemy of turning pain into profit, oppression into beauty, and the man who tried to erase me into my most valuable medium. All of it, my freedom, my fortune, my vengeance, is hidden right here in a rickety shed in a suburban backyard, waiting for the perfect moment to burn it all to the ground. The humiliations were a quiet art form, practiced with a casual, almost bored expertise by my son and his wife. They arrived not in grand theatrical pronouncements, but in the small, grinding details of every day. It began with the cutlery. After a week of living with them, Jessica had approached the dinner table with a small plastic-wrapped bundle. It was a set of white plastic utensils, the kind you get with takeout. "Here, Grace," she'd said, her voice a saccharine performance of thoughtfulness. "I got these just for you. It's just, well, you know how sentimental I am about my silverware. It was a wedding gift, and I'd just hate for anything to happen to it." She smiled, a tight, bloodless thing that never reached her eyes. "Besides, these are much lighter for you to handle." She wasn't worried about her silverware. She was worried about my germs. My old person germs, as I'd overheard her whispering to David on the phone. A contamination that might tarnish the polished silver of their perfect lives. So, I ate with a plastic fork that bent under the weight of a piece of chicken, and a plastic knife that could barely score the skin of a potato. Every night, the scrape of my cheap utensil against my ceramic plate was a dissonant, pathetic counterpoint to the elegant clinking of their sterling silver. David never looked at me. He'd just chew his food, his eyes fixed on the television or on Jessica's face, a silent endorsement of her every cruelty. The indignity was a constant companion, sitting beside me at a table where I often felt I didn't have a seat. They would talk about their friends, their upcoming charity galas, the new Tesla David was considering. I was a ghost at their feast, an ancestral portrait they were forced to hang in the dining room, but whose gaze they studiously avoided. My presence was an obligation, my silence a relief. Most nights they dined out. They would leave in a cloud of expensive perfume and the crisp rustle of designer clothes, leaving me with instructions. "There are leftovers in the fridge, Mum," David would say, his hand already on the doorknob, his escape imminent. "Just heat them up, and don't stay up too late." The leftovers were always a sad archaeology of their indulgence, a single, gnawed-on lamb chop from a restaurant I couldn't pronounce, a spoonful of truffle-infused macaroni and cheese, cold and congealed, a sliver of artisan bread, now stale. I would sit in the cavernous, silent kitchen, eating their scraps under the harsh glare of the under-cabinet lighting. To keep me occupied, they had given me a tablet. "For your entertainment," Jessica had called it, as if she were a benevolent zookeeper, providing enrichment for a languishing animal. But it was not a gift. It was a wall. It was a tool to keep me confined to my corner of the world, to prevent me from intruding on theirs. On it, I watched their lives unfold in a curated stream of digital perfection. Photos of them clinking champagne glasses on a yacht, videos of them laughing at some exclusive event. It was a constant shimmering reminder of the world I was not a part of. A life I had unknowingly funded, but was not invited to live. The television in the main living room was off limits. Jessica had put a parental lock on it. "It's for Chloe," she'd explained, not looking at me. "We don't want her watching anything inappropriate." The implication was clear. I, a 70-year-old woman, was the child who couldn't be trusted. My world was to be the small screen of the tablet, the four walls of my guest room, and the dusty confines of my shed. But in that suffocating darkness, there was one persistent pinprick of light. Chloe. My granddaughter was 7, a whirlwind of untamed curiosity and an empathy that seemed to have skipped a generation. She was the only one who saw me. She would find me in my shed, her small face peeking around the door frame, her eyes wide with wonder at the chaos of my canvases and the strange, earthy smell of my materials. "Grandma," she'd whisper, as if entering a sacred space. I would turn, the oppressive weight on my chest lifting, however briefly. "Hello, my little bird." She would tiptoe in, often hiding something behind her back. It would be a perfectly grilled cheese sandwich, still warm, wrapped in a paper towel, or a handful of the fresh raspberries Jessica reserved for her own morning yogurt. "Mummy said this was for her breakfast, but I think you need it more," she'd say, her small voice a conspiracy of kindness. We would sit together on an old wooden crate, sharing the stolen food like a secret sacrament. For those few minutes, I wasn't eating leftovers. I was having a feast. Chloe never saw my art as junk. She saw the magic in it. She would run her tiny fingers just above the surface of a drying canvas, her touch as light as a moth's wing. "It's like a story, Grandma," she'd breathe, her eyes tracing the violent slashes of crimson and the deep swirling voids of grey. "This one looks like a dragon sleeping in a volcano." Her innocence was a balm, but also a source of deep, aching pain. She saw a dragon. I saw the smouldering rage of my marriage to Richard. She saw beauty. I saw the pulverized bones of my abuser mixed into the very pigment I used to paint my freedom. How could I ever explain that to her? "It is beautiful, Chloe," was all I could ever say. "You have a good eye." Her praise was the only currency that held any value for me. It was worth more than the millions of dollars Alastair Finch wired into the accounts of Crimson Bloom Holdings. Her validation was real. It was pure. It was the only reason I didn't simply crumble into dust myself. For David and Jessica's 20th anniversary, a strange and foolish hope took root in my heart. I thought, perhaps, I could bridge the chasm between us. Not with words, which had long failed me, but with my art, with a piece of my soul. I spent weeks on it, working with a feverish intensity in the shed. I selected a medium-sized canvas, large enough to make a statement, but not so large as to be ostentatious. The piece was a storm, a swirling vortex of the deepest, most complex reds I could create, churning with funereal greys and blacks. It was a raw, visceral thing. It was the color of a bruised heart, the texture of a life lived through a tempest. It was a portrait of survival. In its depths, mixed with the oils and pigments, was the dust from Richard's left femur, the very bone he had once threatened to break mine with. It was a private, terrible irony that gave the piece its power. I called it Anniversary. I wrapped it carefully in plain brown paper and twine. I felt a nervous flutter in my chest as I presented it to them after their celebratory dinner, which, of course, they had enjoyed at a restaurant while I ate a cold sandwich at home. David took it from me, his expression one of mild confusion, as if I'd handed him a strange, unidentifiable object. Jessica watched, her arms crossed, a polite, impenetrable mask on her face. He tore the paper away. The painting seemed to suck the light from the room, its turbulent energy a stark contrast to the sterile beige of their decor. Silence. David blinked. He looked from the canvas to me and back again, his mouth slightly agape. He had no language for this. It was beyond his comprehension. Jessica stepped forward, tilting her head. She let out a small, airy sound. "Oh, well, how rustic, Grace." Rustic. The word landed like a stone in a silent pool. It was a dismissal so complete, so utterly devoid of understanding, that it was more insulting than any slur. She saw a smear of dark paint, a primitive, folksy craft project. She couldn't see the meticulous layering, the complex texturing, the raw, screaming emotion captured in every stroke. She couldn't see the $34 million the art world would have paid for it. "It's very bold," David finally managed, running a hand through his hair. He looked to his wife for the final verdict. "Yes, bold," she agreed. "I'm not sure it really goes with the living room aesthetic, but I know just the place for it." The place she chose was the hallway leading to the garage. A narrow, windowless corridor that smelled faintly of exhaust fumes and her lavender-scented cleaning products. It was a transitional space, a non-space, a place you hurried through without looking. She hung it next to the circuit breaker box. Every day they walked past it. They walked past it on their way to their luxury cars, on their way to their important lives. They walked past a masterpiece worth more than the very house they lived in, more than their cars, more than every piece of furniture and every designer outfit they owned. They walked past the cremated remains of the man they believed was a hero, now immortalized as a smudge of rustic art in a forgotten hallway. They walked past my pain, my rage, my triumph, and my secret. And they saw nothing at all. Every time I heard the garage door rumble open or shut, it was another turn of the screw, another confirmation of my invisibility. The seasons turned, the cruelties accumulated, small daily paper cuts to the soul. I retreated further into my shed, into my work. The canvases piled up, each one a silent scream, and then came the final discard. It happened around Christmas. The air was crisp, and the talk in the house was all of Aspen. Ski rentals, dinner reservations at exclusive mountaintop restaurants, new cashmere sweaters. I listened from the kitchen, sipping my lukewarm tea from a mug, while they planned their idyllic family vacation around the Marble Island. They never once mentioned my name. I told myself they were simply caught up in the excitement. I told myself they would tell me the plan when it was finalized. The day they left, the house was a flurry of activity. Suitcases thudded down the stairs. Jessica barked orders at David and Chloe. I stayed in my room, waiting. I had packed a small bag, just a few essentials, assuming I'd be sharing a room with Chloe as usual. I waited. I heard the front door open and close multiple times. I heard the car engine start. Then I heard it pull away. And then silence. A profound, echoing silence that was heavier and more suffocating than any of their noise. I walked slowly through the empty house. Their beds were unmade, a coffee cup left on the nightstand. They were gone. They had forgotten me. Or, no, that wasn't the right word. Forgetting is an accident. This felt like an erasure. I stood in the silent living room for a long time. My tablet, my window into their world, lay on the side table. My hand trembled as I picked it up. I opened Jessica's Instagram page. The first post was a new one, uploaded just minutes ago. It was a selfie taken in the car. David was driving, a broad, false smile on his face. Jessica was next to him, her sunglasses perched on her head, making a kissy face at the camera. In the back, Chloe was buckled into her car seat. a beautiful snow-capped mountain range visible through the window behind her. The caption was a shard of glass in my heart. Aspen bound. So excited for some quality time with the ones who matter. Hashtag family, hashtag vacation, hashtag making memories, hashtag blessed. And below, the tags. At David Miller, at Chloe Miller Adventures. The ones who matter. I sank onto their cream-coloured sofa, the tablet falling from my numb fingers. I was not one of the ones who mattered. I was the leftover, the ghost, the rustic smudge on the wall. I had been deliberately, publicly, and digitally erased from my own family. That night, something inside me didn't just break, it calcified. The pain and the grief and the decades of suppressed rage coalesced into a single, cold, hard point of clarity. I did not cry. Tears were a luxury I could no longer afford. I walked out to my shed, the cold night air sharp against my face. I switched on the single bare bulb, illuminating the stacks of my life's work. I pulled out my largest canvas, a vast, intimidating expanse of white. I worked through the night, fueled by a purpose so pure and so potent, it felt like divine intervention. I mixed my paints, my hands steady. I took the last of Richard's ashes, the fine, gritty dust from the bottom of the urn, the fragments of his skull, the seat of his cruelty. I blended them into the deepest blacks and the most unforgiving greys. My brushstrokes were not angry or chaotic, they were precise, controlled. Each one was an act of deletion. I wasn't painting a storm anymore. I was painting the chilling, silent void that comes after the storm has passed, obliterating everything in its path. As the first pale light of dawn crept through the grimy window of the shed, I stepped back. The canvas was finished. It was a haunting, monolithic work of profound emptiness, a monument to absence. I knew its name instantly. I called it Erasure. And I knew it was the beginning of the end. He stood back to admire his work, hands on his hips, a little king surveying the final conquest of his domain. Jessica came out to join him, wrapping an arm around his waist, her blonde hair catching the sun like a halo of spun gold. They looked like a portrait of success, the kind of picture that would get 1,000 likes on her social media feed. The caption would be something aspirational, I was sure. New beginnings. So excited for the next chapter. I was the previous chapter, the one being torn out and discarded. The house, my home for 2 decades, was now officially a product, a commodity to be polished, photographed, and sold to the highest bidder. In the days that followed, the air thickened with their plans. Their voices, usually kept to a low conspiratorial murmur when I was around, now spilled into every room, loud and careless. They spoke of infinity pools and home gyms, of moving to a gated community where, as Jessica put it, everyone is on the same page. There was no mention of a guest room in their new fantasy life. No space allocated for a grandmother and her peculiar dusty hobby. I was an inconvenient piece of furniture they were eager to leave on the curb. "We should get an offer within the week," David announced one evening, swaggering into the kitchen where I was meticulously cleaning my designated plastic fork. "The market's on fire. Inventory is low. People are desperate." Jessica, scrolling through her phone at the Marble Island, didn't look up. "Did you talk to the realtor about staging? We need to get all of this out of here." Her thumb flicked dismissively in my vague direction. "It's depressing. Kills the vibe." "I told him we'd have the situation handled before the first open house," David said. The situation? That was me. I said nothing, just continued my task. The rhythmic scrape of plastic on plastic was the only sound I allowed myself to make. Inside, however, a different kind of sound was building. It was the low, steady hum of an engine warming up. It was the sound of a plan, my plan, clicking into place. They thought they were in control, that the sign on the lawn was their declaration of victory. They had no idea it was the starting pistol for a race they didn't even know they were running. A week later, the first tremor hit. I was in my shed, the familiar scent of turpentine and something much older, much more personal, filling my lungs. It was a smell of liberation they mistook for decay. I was mixing a new batch of crimson, a deep arterial red that required a delicate touch and a heavy heart, when I heard David's car screech into the driveway. The slam of his car door was a percussive blast of anger. He stormed into the house, and even through the thin walls of my sanctuary, I could hear him yelling Jessica's name. I put down my palette knife, wiped my hands on a stained rag, and moved to the small, grimy window that overlooked the back of the house. The back door was open. David was pacing the kitchen, his phone pressed to his ear, his face a blotchy, furious red that almost matched the colour on my canvas. "What do you mean it's not in my name?" he shouted into the phone. The words were so sharp they seemed to slice through the glass. "Of course it's in my name. My father, Richard Miller, left it to me. It's in his will." I felt the ghost of a smile touch my lips. The engine was running smoothly now. He listened for a moment, his jaw tight. "A corporation? What the hell are you talking about? What corporation?" He grabbed a pen and a stray utility bill from the counter, scribbling furiously. "Crimson Bloom Holdings? Who the hell is Crimson Bloom Holdings? I've never heard of them." He threw the pen down. It skittered across the counter and fell to the floor. "This is insane. This is a clerical error. My father's finances were a mess after it has to be a mistake. Someone at the county records office screwed up." He was breathing hard. A man whose perfect world had just been cracked down the middle. "No, you listen to me. You're the realtor. You're supposed to fix this. Get to the bottom of it. I don't care what it takes." He hung up, or rather, smashed the end call button with his thumb, and threw the phone onto a sofa cushion. Jessica, who had been watching with wide, alarmed eyes, finally spoke. "David, what is it? What's wrong?" "The house," he seethed, running his hands through his hair. "The realtor says we don't own it, that the title belongs to some shell company, Crimson Bloom Holdings." The name, spoken in his voice, was a secret chord of victory only I could hear. Crimson for the colour of my rage and my liberation. Bloom for the late, unexpected flowering of my life. And holdings, because that's what I was doing. Holding it all. Alistair, my fastidious, loyal Alistair, had chosen the name well. "That's impossible," Jessica said, her voice rising in panic. "Richard left you everything. We saw the will." "I know what the will says," David roared. "This is some kind of corporate fraud. Some vultures trying to pick at my father's estate. He was a good man, but he was too trusting. Someone must have taken advantage of him." The irony was so thick, I could have used it as a medium for my paints. He was defending the honour of the man whose cruelty had fueled my entire artistic existence. A man whose very bones were at that moment drying on a canvas not 50 feet away. The next day, Mr. Thorne arrived. He was exactly the kind of lawyer I expected David to hire. Expensive suit, predatory smile, and a briefcase that seemed to contain nothing but aggression. They met at the dining room table, a space I was never invited to occupy during meals. I was in the kitchen, ostensibly washing the lunch dishes, their lunch dishes, of course. I had eaten a cold sandwich over the sink. But the kitchen was adjacent to the dining room, and their voices carried. "It's an open and shut case of title fraud, Mr. Miller," Thorne said, his voice smooth and confident. "We see this all the time. Predatory entities use confusing paperwork to snatch assets from grieving families. We'll file a motion to quiet the title. We'll sue this Crimson Bloom Holdings into oblivion. Good, David said, his voice filled with a renewed, righteous fury. I want them punished. This is a desecration of my father's memory. He even found an old, yellowed document from a box of Richard's things. A preliminary title report from 30 years ago, full of legalese and official-looking stamps. It was utterly meaningless now, a fossil from a time before I had secretly, meticulously moved every asset Richard thought was his into a fortress of trusts and corporations under my control, a process I began the day after his funeral. But to David, this piece of paper was the Dead Sea Scroll. It was proof. He slid it across the table to Thorne. He glanced at it and nodded grimly.
This helps. Establishes long-term intent. The judge will see it for what it is, a family home being stolen.
The legal threats made the house a pressure cooker. The air was stale with anxiety and whispered arguments about retainers and legal fees. Jessica's carefully curated Instagram feed went silent. David's temper, always a short fuse, was now explosive. A misplaced set of keys, a lukewarm cup of coffee, my mere presence in a room, any of it could set him off. To advance my own narrative, the one where the frail old woman was being forced from her home, I began to pack. I bought a few cardboard boxes and started, very slowly and very visibly, to wrap my brushes and jars of pigment. I was performing a role, the defeated matriarch, quietly accepting her fate. I folded my canvases, the lesser ones, with a theatrical slowness, a sigh for each one. It was during one of these performances that Chloe found me. She pushed open the door to my shed, her small face clouded with a worry that didn't belong on a 12-year-old. The sound of her father's latest phone tirade had just faded from the house. She stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright afternoon, and watched me place a bundle of dried hog hair brushes into a box. "Grandma?" Her voice was small, fragile. I turned, feigning a mild surprise. "Chloe, sweet girl, what is it?" Her eyes, her father's eyes, but with a softness David had long since lost, filled with tears. They welled up and spilled over, tracing clean paths through the light dusting of grime on her cheeks from playing outside. "Are you leaving?" I set the brushes down. My heart, a tough, calloused thing, gave a painful lurch. This was the part of the plan I had not allowed myself to fully consider. The collateral damage. "Your father and Jessica, they think it's for the best," I said softly, sticking to the script. "No," she whispered, stepping inside. The tears were coming faster now. She wiped at them with the back of her hand. "No, it's not for the best. It's mean. This is your house too. Grandpa Richard built this shed for you." My breath caught in my throat. Grandpa Richard built this shed for you. He had. He'd built it as a cage, a place to banish my messy, pointless hobby so it wouldn't clutter up his perfect house. He'd thrown my canvases in here like trash. He told me my hands were meant for scrubbing floors, not holding a paintbrush. But Chloe didn't know that. To her, he was a hero, a strong, benevolent ghost whose smiling photograph sat on her bedside table. She rushed forward and wrapped her arms around my waist, burying her face in my worn cardigan. Her small body shook with sobs. "Don't let them do this, Grandma, please. I'll talk to them. I'll tell them to stop. Please don't go." I stood frozen, my hands hovering in the air before settling on her shaking shoulders. Her warmth, her unconditional love, was a sudden, searing fire against the cold resolve I had spent years building. I looked around the shed. at the finished canvases stacked against the wall, their surfaces shimmering with their terrible, secret ingredient. I saw the nearly finished masterpiece, erasure, waiting on its easel. Was this victory, this righteous, long-overdue justice, worth destroying the one pure thing in my life? Worth taking a hammer to the memory of the grandfather she adored? The truth wouldn't just shatter her world, it would poison it. It would force her to see that the man she loved was a monster, and that her grandmother had spent the last decade turning his remains into art. My carefully constructed facade trembled. For a single, terrifying moment, I faltered. The entire elaborate scheme felt cruel and monstrous. I was no better than they were, using this child's heart as a pawn in my game. I held her tight, smelling the scent of sunshine and grass in her hair. I thought of just stopping, letting Crimson Bloom Holdings dissolve, letting David have the house. I could take my secrets and disappear, leave Chloe with her happy memories intact. I could vanish. But then my eyes landed on a faint, silvery scar on my own wrist, peeking out from the cuff of my sleeve. A relic from a night Richard had gotten angry about a chipped plate. A small, permanent reminder of the price of silence. And I knew I couldn't stop. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about survival. It was about taking the ashes of a life he had tried to burn to the ground and building something indestructible from them. I stroked Chloe's hair, my resolve hardening again, this time into a diamond. "Shh, my sweet girl," I murmured, my voice thick with an emotion that was both real and part of the act. "Don't you worry about your old grandma, everything is going to be all right, I promise." It was a promise I intended to keep, though not in the way she could ever imagine. My apparent capitulation, my quiet packing, had an immediate effect on Jessica. Her relief was palpable. The tension eased from her shoulders, replaced by a smug, efficient energy. The problem was solving itself. The old woman was finally getting the hint. The leaving I was just days from being moved to some state-funded facility. She decided to expedite her plans for the pickleball court. She wanted the shed gone. Yesterday. I was in the kitchen, rinsing my plate, when I heard the low rumble of a heavy truck turning into our street. It was a deep, guttural sound that vibrated through the soles of my worn sneakers. I glanced out the window and saw a large flatbed truck with a small crane parked at the curb. Two men in dusty work boots and bright yellow vests were getting out. Jessica was walking down the driveway to meet them, pointing eagerly toward the back of the house. Toward my shed. A different kind of panic seized me. Not the emotional turmoil Chloe had caused, but a cold, sharp, animal dread. The source. The urn. It was in there. I dried my hands, my movements jerky, and walked as quickly as my 70-year-old legs would carry me to the back door. I stepped onto the patio just as the trio was rounding the corner of the house. "And this is the structure here," Jessica was saying, with the grand air of a developer unveiling a new project. "It's a total teardown. As you can see, it's an eyesore. We want it gone, levelled, not a trace left." The taller of the two men, a burly man with the clipboard, nodded. "No problem, Ma'am. We just need to take a quick look inside, check for any electrical or plumbing hookups, assess the foundation." He took a step toward the shed door. I moved to intercept him, planting myself directly in his path. My heart was a wild bird beating against the cage of my ribs. I'm sorry, I said, my voice coming out thin and reedy. I forced a tremor into it. You can't go in there. All three of them stopped and looked at me. Jessica's face clouded over with immediate, profound annoyance. Mother, for heaven's sake, get out of the way. These gentlemen need to do their job. No, I insisted, my hand gripping the doorknob behind my back. It felt cold, solid. It's not safe. The demolition man looked from me to Jessica, confused. Not safe how, Mom? I had to think fast. My mind, usually so clear and calculating, was a frantic scramble. The chemicals, I stammered, trying to look frail and confused. For my art, my paints, there are volatile pigments, lead, cadmium, very fine dust. It's toxic. The fumes. You need special masks. It's very, very fragile in there. One wrong move and… I let the sentence hang, hoping to fill the space with their own fears of lawsuits and liability. Jessica rolled her eyes so hard I'm surprised they stayed in her head. Oh, honestly, it's just her junk. She makes these ugly little paintings. There's nothing dangerous in there. She looked at the men. She's just being difficult. Ignore her. But the men were hesitant. They exchanged a look. The word chemicals had done its work. The last thing their small company needed was a workers' compensation claim for toxic dust inhalation. We can't go in if there are hazardous materials that haven't been properly secured, ma'am, the taller man said, looking at Jessica but speaking for my benefit. You'll need to have all that cleared out first, per regulations. Call us when it's empty and we'll come back and give you a proper quote. He tipped his hard hat to me, a gesture of professional courtesy that felt like a major victory. The two men turned and walked back toward their truck. Jessica was incandescent with rage. She waited until their truck had rumbled away before turning on me, her voice a low, vicious hiss. What is wrong with you? Do you enjoy making my life difficult? We are trying to sell this house. We are trying to move on with our lives. That pile of junk has to go, and it will go, whether you are in it or not. She stormed back into the house, slamming the door behind her. The sound echoed in the sudden silence. I stood there for a long moment, my back pressed against the shed door, my knuckles white on the knob. My breath came in ragged gasps. They had almost found it. When I was sure I was alone, I unlocked the door and slipped inside, closing it securely behind me. The air was still and thick with the familiar smell of my life's work. My eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through the dusty window. My gaze went immediately to the far wall, the one behind the large easel holding erasure. It looked solid, just a wall of old plywood panels like the others. My hands were shaking as I knelt down. I pried at the edge of the third panel from the bottom. It was loose, designed to be. It came away with a soft groan, revealing a dark, hollow space behind it. And inside that space, sitting on the cool concrete foundation, was a large, heavy, unmarked ceramic urn. It was plain, grey, utterly unremarkable. It had no handles, no decoration. It was designed to be overlooked. But its weight, its density, was immense. It contained all that was left of Richard Miller, the source of my unique pigment, the wellspring of my art and my revenge. I reached in and placed both my hands on its cool, smooth surface. The frantic beating of my heart began to slow. This was the center of my storm. This was my anchor. They had come so close. They had stood just a few feet away, separated by a thin sheet of wood and their own ignorance from the abhorrent truth of the house they were so desperate to sell. The thread was unraveling faster than I had anticipated. The near discovery was a warning. My silent preparations had to end. It was time to set the stage for the final act. The silence in the house after the demolition crew left was different. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of an empty home. It was the tense, waiting silence of a battlefield after the first volley has been fired. The air was thick with Jessica's triumph and David's relieved condescension. They had won. They had backed the old woman into a corner, and now all that was left was for her to scurry away. I sat at the kitchen table, the one they allowed me to use when they weren't entertaining, and stared at the floral placemat, its pattern faded from years of scrubbing. I let the silence stretch, letting them savor their victory. They needed to believe they had broken me. The structure of my revenge depended on their absolute certainty of my defeat. I looked up, meeting David's eyes first. He had the decency to look momentarily uncomfortable. A fleeting shadow of the boy I once knew before Jessica had chiseled him into a form she found more acceptable. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by a firm, parental resolve. It was the look he gave Chloe when she'd misbehaved. It was infuriatingly patronizing. "Mum," he began, his voice softer than it had been in weeks, the tone of someone delivering a final, non-negotiable verdict with a pretense of kindness. We can't have that shed here anymore. It's a liability, and the pickleball court will add real value to the property. You understand, don't you?" I didn't look at Jessica, but I could feel her gaze on me, sharp and analytical, checking for any sign of a fight. I gave her none. I let my shoulders slump, a gesture I had perfected over the years. It was the physical manifestation of surrender, of a burden too heavy to carry. I looked at my hands resting on the table. They were old hands, spotted and wrinkled, but they were the hands that had built an empire from the ashes of a monster. They didn't see that. They saw the hands of a feeble woman who couldn't even keep her small corner of the world tidy. "You're right, David," I said, my voice a low, raspy thing. I made sure it trembled just a little. "It's your house. You and Jessica have been so generous, letting me stay here for so long."
The generous hung in the air, a sour note only I could taste. To them, it was a simple acknowledgement of fact. Jessica's posture relaxed, a small, satisfied smile played on her lips. She leaned against the marble countertop, a queen surveying her domain, now cleansed of its one imperfection.
"Well, we are family, Grace. We just want what's best. And honestly, it's time. You need to be in a place with proper care. I'll be out by the end of the month," I said, cutting through her saccharine justification. I lifted my gaze and looked directly at them, a placid, empty look in my eyes. I held it, letting them see the vacancy I was projecting. I saw it then, the thing I was counting on, a flicker of shared victory between them, a triumphant smirk that passed from David to Jessica. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but I caught it. It was the seal on their arrogance, the confirmation that their plan had worked. They saw a defeated old woman, A problem neatly solved, ready to be filed away in a state-run facility. They didn't see me later that night, after the house had fallen into a true deep quiet. They didn't see me slip into the small guest bathroom, the only room without a camera, a paranoid installation by Jessica after she'd convinced herself a cleaning lady was stealing her expensive face creams. They didn't see me retrieve a small, plastic-wrapped object from the bottom of a box of sanitary pads I knew no one would ever touch. A burner phone. Simple, untraceable, paid for in cash months ago at a convenience store 3 towns over. The screen lit up my face in the dark, the only light in the small, windowless room. I dialed a number I knew by heart, a number that connected me not to a place, but to a person. It rang twice. Alistair Finch. A crisp British voice answered. There was no preamble, no hello, just his name. It was the voice of a man who measured his time in millions of dollars per minute. It's me, I said, my voice no longer trembling. It was as clear and cold as the tile floor beneath my feet. They've taken the bait. There was a pause, and I could hear the faint sound of a pen being set down on a desk. Alistair's mind worked like a steel trap. He was already processing, calculating. The ultimatum was delivered then, as we predicted. This afternoon, I confirmed. They want to build a pickleball court. I couldn't help the dry, humorless chuckle that escaped me. They believe I am packing my bags for a nursing home. Their lack of imagination is as ever their greatest vulnerability, Alistair said. And the house? The sale? David mentioned it again. He's furious that the title search is being held up. He's talking about hiring a more aggressive lawyer to sue this mysterious Crimson Bloom Holdings. Alistair's laugh was a low, rich sound, a stark contrast to my own. Excellent. Let him spend his money. It will only make the final invoice all the more poignant. Is the timeline still viable, Grace? The demolition crew. They didn't get inside, did they? My hand tightened on the phone. The near discovery had been a close call. No, I stopped them at the door. But the clock is ticking, Alistair. They're getting impatient. Jessica wants the ground broken before their big summer party. Then we accelerate, he said, his voice all business. I will have the legal team finalize the transfer disclosures. They will be delivered by courier to their new aggressive lawyer the day of the party. The portfolio is stable, Grace. The last auction in Geneva exceeded all expectations. Phoenix Ascent number 7 sold for $42 million. Your net worth has officially crossed the 9-figure threshold. I felt nothing. The numbers were abstract, a scoreboard in a game only I was playing. The only thing that felt real was the cold, hard certainty of my plan. The money is irrelevant, Alistair. You know that. It's just the weapon. I know, he said, his voice softening for the first time. I just want you to remember the scale of what you've built. From that. He didn't have to say more. He was the only person on earth who knew the whole story, who had seen the frightened, bruised woman I had been when I first walked into his London gallery 30 years ago, with a small, terrifyingly intense canvas wrapped in a stained blanket. He had seen the darkness in my work and instead of recoiling, had seen its power. He had helped me create Anonymous, helped me build the corporate shields, the blind trusts, the entire architecture of my secret life. The stage needs to be set, I said, my mind shifting to the next piece of the puzzle. Jessica's vanity is the key. Leave that to me, Alistair said. I'll book my flight to Dallas. Just tell me when. We will need a suitable pretense for my arrival. I'll handle that, I said. I have an idea. She's planning a dinner party, a big one. She wants to show off the new landscaping plans for her pickleball court. Perfect, Alistair breathed. Theatricality at its finest. They're building a stage for their own execution. Is there anything else you need from me, Grace? No, I said. Just be ready. I've been ready for 30 years, he replied, and the line went dead. I dismantled the phone, putting the SIM card and the body in separate locations, back in their unassuming hiding places. I washed my face with cold water, looking at my reflection in the dark mirror. The defeated old woman was gone. In her place was a stranger, her eyes glittering with a cold, hard light. In her place was Anonymous. The next few weeks were a performance. I played the part of a woman grieving the loss of her small sanctuary. I moved slowly, sighed often. I began packing boxes, filling them with the few worthless possessions they had allowed me to keep in my room. Old clothes, faded photographs of a life before David, a handful of paperback novels. I let them see me doing it. I let Jessica walk past my open door, a look of satisfied pity on her face as she saw me wrapping a cheap porcelain bird in newspaper. Every box I packed was a piece of misdirection. Every sigh was a calculated lie. My real work happened in the pre-dawn hours, in the shed they thought was empty. I had already moved the most important things. The large sealed urn containing Richard's remaining ashes was now safely concealed behind the false back of the guest room closet, a space I had constructed myself years ago. But the art? The finished pieces were still in the shed, veiled under dusty tarps. And there was one more piece I needed to make. Chloe was my shadow during those days. Her small face was a storm cloud of confusion and sadness. She didn't understand. In her world, grandmothers were supposed to stay. They were fixtures, like the sun. "Are you really going, Grandma?" she asked one afternoon, her voice small. She was sitting on the floor of my room watching me fold a worn-out cardigan. I stopped my charade and sat on the edge of the bed, patting the space next to me. She crawled up, her little body warm against my side. I wrapped an arm around her. She was the one crack in my armour, the one person whose pain was not a calculated part of my plan. "It's time for me to find a new place to live, sweet girl," I said gently. "But why? Don't you like it here?" Her eyes, so much like my own had been at her age, were wide and searching. "Is it because of the pickleball court? I don't want a pickleball court. I like your art house." I squeezed her shoulder. "It's not about the court, Chloe. It's just grown-up things." Her face crumpled. "I'll miss you. Who will show me how to mix the colours?" My heart ached. She was the only one who had ever shown genuine interest in my hobby. She didn't see junk or a mess. She saw magic. She saw swirling galaxies and fiery sunsets. She saw beauty. That night, after my call with Alistair, confirming the final details of his travel, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't leave her with nothing but the memory of a sad old woman being carted away. She deserved a piece of the magic, a piece of the real me. Not Anonymous, the vengeful artist, but Grace, her grandmother. I crept out to the shed one last time. The air inside was thick with the ghosts of my work, the faint metallic scent that always clung to the dust. But tonight, I wasn't reaching for the urn. I took out a small, pristine white canvas, no bigger than a shoebox. I set out fresh paints, colours I had purchased specifically for this. There was no crimson, no deep, unsettling scarlet born of bone and rage. Instead, I chose brilliant cerulean blue, shimmering silver, a deep, peaceful violet, and a bright, hopeful gold. My hands moved with a certainty they hadn't felt in a long time. This wasn't about exorcising demons or turning pain into power. This was an act of pure creation, an act of love. I painted a swirling galaxy, a nebula of brilliant, joyful colour. It was vibrant and alive, a universe of pure, untainted light. It was everything I wanted for her future. It was the only piece I had ever made without my special ingredient. It was clean. It was pure. It was for her. The next day, I found her in the garden, drawing in her sketchbook. I sat down on the grass beside her. "I have something for you, Chloe," I said softly. I held out the small canvas which I had wrapped in simple brown paper. Her eyes lit up as she carefully unwrapped it. She gasped when she saw the painting. She didn't say anything for a long moment, just traced the swirls of colour with her small finger. "It's the stars," she whispered, her voice full of awe. "Like the ones in your big paintings, but happy." She understood. Of course, she understood. "So you'll always have a piece of me," I told her, my voice thick with emotion I didn't have to fake. "To remember that we can make beautiful things, no matter what." She threw her arms around my neck, hugging me so tightly I could feel her little heart beating against my chest. She held the small canvas like it was the most precious treasure in the world. And in that moment, it was. It was the one good, clean thing that would survive the inferno I was about to unleash. With Chloe's gift delivered, the final piece of my own heart was shielded. Now I could become the architect of ruin without reservation. The coldness returned, settling over me like a shroud. It was time to set the final trap. Jessica had been insufferable for days, flitting around the house on her phone, talking loudly about caterers, florists, and invitation designs. Her dinner party was escalating from a simple gathering to a full-blown social event. She was determined to showcase her new status as a woman of leisure and taste, whose property values were about to skyrocket. Her vanity was a roaring fire, and I was about to pour gasoline on it. That evening, I waited until she and David had gone out for dinner, a celebratory meal for the finalization of the demolition contract. I went into David's home office. I rarely entered this room. It was his domain, full of leather-bound books he'd never read and awards for his work in middle management. But I knew his habits. He never logged out of his personal email. It took me less than 5 minutes to create a new anonymous email address, something sophisticated and plausible. I chose NYCART Topicalog Board Inquiries. Then I began to compose the email. I chose my words as carefully as I chose my paints. Every sentence was a lure, every phrase designed to hook into her deepest insecurities and loftiest ambitions. To jessica.morgan.designs@email.com from nycar.review.inquiries@email.com. Subject: Inquiry regarding Anonymous and a potential feature. Dear Miss Morgan, my name is Eleanor Vance. I am a contributing critic for the New York Times Arts and Culture section. I am currently developing a feature piece on the enduring mystery and profound market impact of the artist known only as Anonymous. During my preliminary research, your name has emerged from a number of our sources within the art world. There are persistent, if discreet, rumours suggesting a close personal connection between you and the artist. Perhaps a familial or patron relationship that has served as the muse for the Phoenix from the Ashes collection. We have heard Anonymous described as a close family friend. The narrative of a reclusive genius being quietly inspired by a contemporary figure of taste and style is incredibly compelling. We believe our readers would be fascinated by your story and your unique insights into the artist's world. The human element is what elevates a story from a simple market report to a cultural touchstone. I will be in Dallas for a brief research trip in the coming weeks. I would be deeply honored if you would grant me a short, informal interview to discuss your relationship with Anonymous and your thoughts on their staggering body of work. I am, of course, prepared to operate with the utmost discretion to protect the artist's privacy. Thank you for your time and consideration. I look forward to the possibility of speaking with you. Sincerely, Eleanor Vance. Art critic, The New York Times. I read it over 3 times, a faint, cold smile on my lips. It was perfect. It offered her everything she craved. Validation from a prestigious institution, a connection to fame and genius, and the chance to be the center of attention. It painted her not as the daughter-in-law of a burdensome old woman, but as the silent muse to a world-famous artist. The hook was cast, the line was baited. The sinker was her own ego. I sent the email and wiped my digital tracks, clearing the browser history and the sent folder. I left the office exactly as I had found it. I didn't have to wait long. An hour later, David and Jessica returned, their voices loud and cheerful in the foyer. I was in the kitchen, washing my 1 plate and fork, playing my part. Then I heard it, a sharp, piercing shriek from the living room. It wasn't a scream of fear, but of pure, unadulterated ecstasy. David! David! Oh my God, you are not going to believe this. I heard David's hurried footsteps, his concerned voice. Jess? What is it? What happened? Look! Just look! I dried my hand slowly, my heart a steady, rhythmic drum. I could picture the scene perfectly. Jessica, phone in her hand, her face illuminated by the screen, her eyes wide with disbelief and skyrocketing vanity. The New York Times, they want to interview me, she was saying, her voice breathless and trembling with excitement. About Anonymous. They think I'm her muse. They said they heard I was a close family friend. There was a moment of stunned silence from David. What? How could they? Who cares how? Jessica shrieked. This is it. This is huge. Oh my God, the dinner party. It can't just be a dinner party now. It has to be an event. This critic, Eleanor Vance, she's coming to Dallas. I'll invite her. We can casually reveal my connection to the art world. It will be perfect. I leaned against the counter in the shadows of the kitchen, listening to her frantic, gleeful planning. She was no longer just building a pickleball court. She was setting a stage. My stage. She was sending out the invitations, ordering the flowers, hiring the caterers for her own public immolation. And she was doing it all with a joyful, triumphant heart, the hook, line, and sinker. I turned and walked silently back to my room. I picked up the small porcelain bird I had wrapped in newspaper earlier that day. I carefully unwrapped it and set it on my nightstand. The packing was over, the quiet acquiescence was complete. The real preparations were about to begin. Alistair was on his way. The audience was being gathered. The curtain was about to rise. The clinking of wine glasses sounded like tiny, fragile bells, each one a note in the symphony of Jessica's self-congratulation. She was holding court at the head of her long, polished mahogany table, a queen surveying her domain. The air was thick with the scent of roasted duck, truffle oil, and expensive perfume. Her friends, a collection of women with taut faces and hungry eyes, hung on her every word. The New York Times, can you believe it? Jessica said, her voice a practiced melody of feigned humility. They called me. They said they've been following my Ascent of a Tastemaker series and want to do a feature on our home, on our lifestyle. A woman with lips like 2 plump sausages, Diane, gasped theatrically. Jess,
That's incredible. You'll be a national sensation.
Well, Jessica said, flicking a piece of lint from her silk blouse, I do think it's important to show people that good taste isn't just for the born rich. It can be cultivated. She gestured vaguely around the room, at the art she'd bought from sterile, soulless galleries, the furniture that cost more than my husband's first car. It's about having an eye for things. I sat at the far end of the table, a ghost at their feast. They had placed me here, as far from the centre of attention as possible. I was a prop, the dowdy dependent mother-in-law, a useful sob story for Jessica to trot out when she needed to appear compassionate. My plate held a small, dry piece of chicken, a side dish to their opulent duck confit. My cutlery was the same cheap, lightweight set I used every day, a stark contrast to the heavy, ornate silver in their hands. I didn't mind. I watched them, these piranhas in couture, and I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. The stage was set. The audience was seated. The final act was about to begin. David, my son, beamed at his wife with a look of bovine adoration. He had grown soft over the years, his spine dissolving in the acid of his wife's ambition. My Jessica, he said, raising his glass. She can do anything she sets her mind to. Next week, the pickleball court goes in. The old shed's coming down. Finally get rid of that awful smell. He winked at me, a gesture meant to be playful but landing like a slap. I gave a small, non-committal smile. They thought the smell was mildew and turpentine. They had no idea it was the scent of my liberation. As Jessica launched into another story, this one about a bidding war over a gaudy chandelier, the doorbell rang. A sharp, clear, insistent chime that cut through the chatter like a shard of glass. Jessica's perfectly plucked eyebrows knitted together in annoyance. Who on earth could that be? I wasn't expecting anyone else. David grunted, already halfway through his third glass of wine. Probably just a delivery, I'll get it. He pushed his chair back a little unsteadily. No, stay, Jessica commanded, placing a hand on his arm. She didn't want him stumbling to the door in front of her important guests. She looked down the table towards me, her eyes landing on me as if I were a piece of furniture that could be ordered to move, but before she could speak, the doorbell rang again, twice this time, patient but firm. With a long-suffering sigh, Jessica stood up, smoothing down her dress. Honestly, the incompetence. She walked through the grand foyer, her heels clicking on the marble floors. I heard the heavy front door swing open. Her voice, initially sharp with irritation, shifted to one of confusion. Alistair? Alistair Finch? What are you doing here? A man's voice, smooth and cultured as aged whiskey, replied. It was a voice I knew well, a voice that had spoken to me with respect and awe over secure phone lines for 2 decades. Good evening, Jessica. Jessica's voice was flustered. I don't understand. Are you here for the New York Times piece? It's not until next week. No, Alistair's voice said, closer now as he stepped into the foyer. I'm not here for that. Jessica led him into the dining room. Alistair Finch was exactly as I pictured him from our single brief meeting in a discreet London hotel years ago. He was tall, silver-haired, and wore a Savile Row suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe for the last 40 years. His eyes, a piercing shade of blue, swept across the room, taking in the gawking guests, the opulent table, and David, who was staring with his mouth slightly agape. Alistair's gaze was polite, but held the cool, detached assessment of a predator. He radiated a power that made Jessica's social climbing efforts look like a child's tea party.
Alistair Finch,
Diane, the sausage-lipped woman, breathed.
the Alistair Finch? From the Finch Gallery?
Alistair gave a small, polite nod in her direction, but his eyes continued their search. They passed over David, over the other guests, and finally, they landed on me, sitting in the shadows at the end of the table. A flicker of something, recognition, respect, even warmth, passed across his face. The cold mask of the businessman dropped for a fraction of a second, just for me. "What is going on?" David slurred slightly, pushing his chair back. "Do you know my wife?" "I do," Alistair said smoothly. "But that's not why I'm here. Grace invited me." Every head in the room swiveled towards me. Jessica's face was a masterpiece of confusion and scorn. "Grace? My Grace? She doesn't know anyone like you. She doesn't know anyone." The possessive pronoun, my Grace, hung in the air. A final, unwitting assertion of ownership. Alistair ignored her. He took a few steps forward, his expensive leather shoes silent on the thick Persian rug. His focus was entirely on me. "I was told the artist would be here," he said, his voice resonating in the now silent room. "And I was also told I could finally meet the true owners of this magnificent house." He stopped a few feet from my chair. He looked directly into my eyes, and the world seemed to slow down. The curious faces, the half-eaten food, the glittering chandelier, it all faded into a blur. There was only this man, the gatekeeper to my secret world, and the moment of reckoning he was about to unleash. He gave a slight, formal bow. "Hello, Anonymous." Silence. Not a quiet lull in conversation, but a profound, absolute void of sound. It was as if a vacuum had sucked all the air and noise from the room. A woman's wine glass, halfway to her lips, froze in mid-air. Someone coughed, a dry, nervous little sound that seemed deafeningly loud. Jessica stared at Alistair, then at me, then back at Alistair. A small, uncomprehending laugh escaped her lips. "What did you just call her?" David's wine-fogged brain was struggling to catch up. He squinted at me, his brow furrowed. "Anonymous? What's that? Is this some kind of joke?" Alistair remained perfectly still, his gaze fixed on me. He had delivered the line, the rest was mine. But I waited. I let the silence stretch, letting their confusion curdle into something else. I watched the gears turning in their heads, the slow, dawning realization that the world as they knew it was tilting on its axis. It was David who spoke first, his voice a bewildered stammer. "Mum, you?" He looked at me as if for the first time, not as the frail, dependent old woman, but as a stranger. The name, Anonymous, was a key he was trying to fit into a lock he didn't know existed. He thought of my shed, my messy hobby, the strange canvases he'd glimpsed. His eyes widened, a flicker of something primal and greedy lighting them from within. That painting in the hall," he whispered, his voice cracking, "the one you made for our anniversary. Is it worth—" The question hung in the air, thick with desperation and avarice. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask what it all meant. He went straight to the money, as I always knew he would. Alistair answered for me, his voice as cool and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. The piece you're referring to is titled Phoenix Number 17, The Gilded Cage. It sold at a private auction last year. The last registered valuation was $34 million. This time the silence was broken by a collective gasp. Diane's hand flew to her mouth. Another guest choked on his wine. $34 million. The number was obscene, incomprehensible. It echoed in the opulent room, making all of Jessica's curated treasures look like trinkets from a dollar store. Jessica's face had gone completely white, the colour of bone. Her perfectly painted red lips were parted in a silent "oh" of shock. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, darted from the hallway where the painting hung in the dim light to my face. The scorn was gone, replaced by a horrifying, frantic calculation. 34, she breathed. Her eyes were glazed over, seeing not a painting but a mountain of cash. David stumbled to his feet, knocking his chair over with a loud clatter that made everyone jump. 34 million. Mom, is this true? His voice was a raw plea. He looked at me, his eyes begging me to confirm it, to make this insane fantasy real. I just looked at him, my expression unreadable. Alistair took a small step forward, drawing the attention back to him. He was the narrator of this nightmare, and he delivered his lines with chilling precision. That is correct. It is one of the less valuable pieces in the Phoenix from the Ashes collection, but it has its admirers. He paused, letting the insult, less valuable, land on Jessica like a physical blow. He then addressed both of them, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more formal, more lethal. And that brings me to my second reason for being here. This house. He made a sweeping gesture that encompassed the marble floors, the high ceilings, the mahogany table. Along with the cars in your garage, the portfolio of stocks that pays for your vacations, and the liquid assets in the accounts you draw from, are all the property of a private corporation. David looked completely lost. A corporation? What are you talking about? This house is mine. It was my father's. No, David, Alistair said gently, the way one speaks to a confused child. Your father, Richard, left the house to your mother upon his death. 15 years ago, she used it as the foundational asset to create a holding company. The company is called Crimson Bloom Holdings. He smiled, a thin, humorless expression. She is the sole shareholder and director. You and your wife, for the last 15 years, have been living in her house, on her money, as her guests. The room erupted in frantic whispers. The guests were no longer looking at Jessica with envy, but with a kind of morbid pity and fascination. They were witnessing a spectacular, real-time social execution. Jessica's meticulously constructed world of influence and good taste had been revealed as a sham, a long-term charity case funded by the very woman she treated like garbage. Jessica swayed on her feet, her hand clutching the back of a chair for support. No, she whispered. No, it's not possible. Her eyes found mine, and for the first time I saw genuine fear in them. The fear not of losing money, but of losing control, of being exposed as a fraud, a parasite. David just stood there, his face slack with shock. The blood had drained from it, leaving his skin a pasty, greyish colour. He looked from Alistair to me, his mind collapsing under the weight of the revelations, the apathetic son, the greedy husband, and now the unwitting tenant in his own mother's house. He had been living a lie, a comfortable, luxurious lie, and the truth was a debt he could never repay. I finally decided it was time for me to speak. I had let Alistair set the stage, lay out the facts in his cold, legalistic way. But the final truth, the heart of the matter, had to come from me. I rose from my chair. My movements were slow, deliberate. I felt none of the aches and pains that usually plagued my 70-year-old bones. I felt light. I felt powerful. The cheap dress I wore suddenly felt like a suit of armor. Every eye was on me. The whispers died. The room held its breath. My voice, when it came out, was not the meek, reedy thing they were used to. It was clear, steady, and it filled the room without any effort. It was the voice of a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to reclaim. "You always wondered about my art," I began, my eyes locking with David's. "The critics did too. They wrote about the pigment, the unique texture, the specific shade of crimson that appears in every piece of the Phoenix collection." I paused, letting my words hang in the air like dust motes in a sunbeam. "They called it hauntingly human." I saw a flicker of revulsion on Jessica's face. She'd always called my work morbid. Now the word human seemed to disturb her on a primal level. "You, David," I continued, my voice softening with a false pity, "you always told me it was the smell. You complained about the toxic fumes from my little shed. You wanted it gone." He flinched, as if I had struck him. He remembered his words, he remembered his cruelty. "Your father, Richard," I said, and the name dropped into the room like a stone. "You remember him as a hero, don't you? Strong, decisive, a man's man." David nodded dumbly, a lost little boy. He was a good father." Then a laugh, dry and brittle as dead leaves, escaped my lips. "No, David, he wasn't. Your father was a monster. He was a bully who found joy in breaking things. My canvases, my paintbrushes, my spirit, my bones." A shocked murmur went through the guests. David's face contorted in a mask of defensive anger. "Don't you talk about him like that. He's dead." "Oh, I know he is," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, a conspiratorial, chilling tone. "I know better than anyone. He was a monster, but he was a useful one. In the end, he did leave me one thing of value, the only thing he ever gave me that I could truly use." I smiled, a real smile this time, and I felt the corners of my mouth tremble with the force of it. He gave me himself. My gaze shifted from my son's horrified face to the corner of the room near the grand fireplace. There, on a small, ornate side table, sat a large, unremarkable ceramic urn. It was one of the pieces from my shed, a failed pottery project from years ago. Earlier that day, I had asked David to bring it inside. "The demolition crew is coming tomorrow, David," I had said in my most pathetic voice. "I'm worried they'll break this old thing. It's the last thing I made before my arthritis got too bad." He had rolled his eyes but complied, carrying it in with disdain and placing it wherever it would be out of the way, another piece of his mother's junk cluttering up his perfect house. Now it sat there, an ignored object that had become the horrifying centerpiece of my story. I pointed a single trembling finger at it. "For 20 years, David, since the day I received his ashes from the crematorium, I have been painting. I have been mixing a special ingredient into my paints to give them that unique texture, that unparalleled depth of color. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with a dawning, unspeakable horror. Jessica brought a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with terror, as if she was finally understanding. She looked from the urn to the $34 million painting in her hallway. I let the silence stretch, twisting the knife. I wanted them to get there on their own. I wanted them to see the abyss before I pushed them in. "Every award I've won," I said, my voice a cold, hard litany. "Every dollar I've earned, every critic's praise, every sold-out exhibition, every ounce of my success. It was all made from the dust of the man who tried to destroy me." David shook his head, a violent, jerky motion. "No. No, no, no." I turned my full attention to him, my eyes burning into his. I delivered the final devastating truth, the line I had rehearsed in my head for 2 decades, the words that would shatter his world forever. "That painting in your hallway, David," I said, my voice utterly devoid of emotion.
The one you walk past every day? The one your wife despised but kept because she hoped it might be worth something? That's your father's left femur.
The silence that followed my confession was a living thing. It was heavier than any of Richard's fists, more suffocating than any of the gaslighting insults I had endured for decades. It filled the grand dining room, pressing down on the Michelin-starred plates and the crystal glasses, smothering the shocked, open mouths of Jessica's high society friends. The air, once perfumed with expensive wine and truffle oil, now smelled of nothing but dread. The first sound to break the spell was not a scream or a denial, but a wet, guttural retch. Jessica, my daughter-in-law, the queen of curated perfection, stumbled back from the table. Her manicured hands flew to her mouth, but it was too late. She doubled over, her silk dress shimmering under the chandelier, and vomited into a large porcelain pot that held a spray of pristine white orchids. The sound was obscene in the opulent quiet. The desecration was perfect. David didn't move. He didn't even seem to be breathing. His face, usually flushed with entitlement and cheap wine, was a waxy, bloodless mask. His eyes were fixed, not on me, not on his heaving wife, but on the painting hanging in the hallway, the one they had walked past 1,000 times a day, the one Jessica had called a depressing dust catcher. I watched him as he stared, and I could almost see the gears of his mind grinding, screaming as they were forced into reverse. He wasn't seeing a $34 million masterpiece anymore. He was seeing his father, his hero. He was seeing the man who taught him to ride a bike, the man whose approval he had chased his entire life, not as a memory, but as a pigment, a smear of texture, a shade of crimson he had casually ignored for years. That heroic image of Richard, the one David had polished and sanctified in his mind, was cracking like old varnish, flaking away to reveal the monstrous truth underneath. His father wasn't a legend. He was landscape. The guests, sensing the social contagion of the moment, began to evaporate. They mumbled excuses, their eyes darting between me, the vomit-splattered orchids, and the horrific painting in the hall. They fled, not wanting to be caught in the blast radius of a truth this raw, this radioactive. Soon it was just us, me, Alistair, standing silently by my side, and the shattered remnants of the family I had served. The story, of course, broke, but not the one Jessica had been so desperate to orchestrate with the New York Times critic I had invented. There was no feature on her impeccable taste, or her rise as a lifestyle influencer. The phones began to ping, one after another, a relentless digital chorus of ruin. The narrative that exploded across the internet was one of cruelty, of abuse, of a legendary hidden artist and her tormentors. The secret of Anonymous, how an art world icon lived in squalor, abused by her own family. The ghoulish truth behind the Phoenix Ashes collection. Jessica's carefully constructed empire of sponsored posts and hollow affirmations crumbled in a matter of hours. Her followers, the ones who had adored her for her authenticity, turned on her with a ferocity she had never anticipated. She wasn't just cancelled, she was erased. Her brand, built on a foundation of lies, was now buried under an avalanche of truth. She had wanted fame, and in the end she got it. In the days that followed, a strange, heavy quiet settled over the house. The performative laughter was gone. The loud, one-sided phone calls about brunches and brand deals ceased. There was only the sound of David pacing his office, the muffled sobs from Jessica's bedroom, and the oppressive weight of what they now knew. I never considered pressing charges. I didn't call a lawyer to draft eviction notices. What would be the point? Sending them to jail would be a mercy. Forcing them out of the house would be a release. My revenge was never about legalities or possession. It was about consciousness. I had wanted them to know. And now they did. I decided to leave them there, in that beautiful, expensive prison. I would leave them to walk those polished floors, to sleep in those 1,000 thread-count sheets, forever haunted by the knowledge that the very walls around them were a mausoleum, a grand, opulent tomb dedicated not only to the man they revered, but to their own bottomless greed. They were trapped, not by bars, but by the truth. Every glance at the hallway, every thought of their inheritance would be a fresh torment. They would have to live with the desecrated remains of their patriarch, not as a secret I held, but as a fact of their existence. The day I left, I packed a single small canvas bag. I took a change of clothes, my well-worn brushes, and the small, pure painting I had made for Chloe. I walked through the house one last time. It felt like a stranger's home, a museum of bad memories. I passed the dining room where I'd eaten scraps from a plastic plate. I passed the hallway where my masterpiece, my pain and my freedom, was displayed like a curse. I found Chloe in her room, sitting on her bed. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but when she looked at me, there was no fear, no revulsion. There was only a deep, gut-wrenching sadness, and beneath it, the first glimmers of a terrible understanding. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice fragile. Is it true?" I sat beside her, the old mattress dipping under my weight. I didn't offer platitudes or excuses. I owed her the same raw truth I had given her parents. "Your grandfather," I said softly, "was not the man your father told you he was. He hurt me for a very long time. When he was gone, all that was left of him was ash. And all that was left of me was my art. I had to put the pain somewhere, Chloe. So I painted it. I painted it until I was free." She looked at the small, beautiful landscape I held out to her, the one with no crimson, no ash, just soft greens and blues, a peaceful world. She took it with trembling hands. Tears welled in her eyes and spilt down her cheeks. But she wasn't crying for the monster she'd never known. She was crying for the grandmother she was only just beginning to see. After a long moment, she looked up at me, her young face set with a resolve that mirrored my own. "I'm coming with you," she said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. She understood. This wasn't an act of madness, it was an act of profound, desperate survival. We walked out of that front door together, into the bright, indifferent sunshine. We didn't look back. I left them with the house, the money, and the bones of their father. I took the only thing that had ever truly mattered, the future. My new studio was small, clean, and filled with light. It was in a quiet part of town, above a bookstore. There was no lock on the inside, no need to hide. The first canvas I stretched felt different in my hands. It was a promise, not a vessel for pain. For weeks, I just sat with it, letting the silence and the sunlight wash over me. Then, one morning, I began to paint. It was a self-portrait, just my face looking forward. My hair was white. My skin was a roadmap of my 70 years. But my eyes were clear. I used simple earth tones, blues and whites. There was no crimson. There was no ash. There was no Richard. There was just me. It was the most honest thing I had ever painted. When it was finished, Alistair arranged for its sale, but I had one condition. I sold it to a small local museum, a place for the community, for the sum of $1. The curator was baffled, but he saw the look in my eyes and understood. The message was clear. My revenge was complete. I no longer needed to paint my pain into existence to be seen. I no longer needed to turn my agony into art, to prove I had survived. The cycle was broken. From now on, my life, like my canvas, would be my own creation. And for the first time, it was beautifully, liberatingly blank.